All right, good evening, council, and everyone else. It is October the 13th, our regular council meeting. We will start tonight's meeting with the approval of the agendas, and then get into the a moment of reflection. So, consent agenda, is there any questions? Motion to approve the consent agenda? Councillor Wilson makes the motion. Comment from Councillor Orr.
Just a typo that I noticed. The name of Ingrid Hess, I believe, is the spelling that needs to be checked in that. I believe her last name is spelled incorrectly there.
Very well. Any other discussion on the consent agenda? Seeing none, we'll call it the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. Moving on to a regular agenda, I've not heard of any changes or requested changes to the agenda. There's no further discussion or motion from council, for the approval of the agenda. Councillor Monteith makes the motion. Call it the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. Now we'll take a moment of reflection before we get into the rest of our meeting. Carrying on then to for the good of council, does anyone have something they'd like to share with council? Councillor Dressler.
I would first like to say thank you very much to the town of Fort Macleod for allowing me the opportunity to attend the Beauty and the Beast that was done at the Midnight Rodeo Stadium. It was very well. I enjoyed the evening, which was barrel racing and also bull riding. So it was a great turnout also too of participants, including some for watching the event. And I think it was great. Especially at the times right now with COVID and everything else like that. The other thing I would like to acknowledge as well is and say thank you very much is the International Women's Day, which was a great presentation that was done by the CAF and on women that were helping out the Canadian Armed Forces during World War II. Doing photography on the home front and media releases and everything else like that, and working in their factories. So kudos to all the women in Canada. So I think it was great to participate into that and watch that virtual show. So thank you.
Very good. Anyone else have something they'd like to share? I know it's a few weeks back, but I was able to take in the reconciliation walk in the community that we had September 30. Was well done by the community. I thought it was neat to see the different stations and get to hear some of the elders' stories and some of the other thoughts on reconciliation as well. So it's a journey, but I believe there's been some good progress. Anyone else? All right, so moving back to the regular, we will be moving on to unfinished business. We have Councillor Dressler speaking on Bill C-71. And before you start, Councillor Dressler, is the recommendation your recommended motion too? Is that correct?
Sorry, Your Worship. Say that again.
Is the recommendation in our submission the recommended motion that you're wishing us to consider?
That is correct.
Okay.
I was recommending a motion. As you can see, and which was presented to you, is on Bills C-71 and the updates that have currently been done by our federal government. Not in the House of Commons, but under the, well, the Commons has been closed. Recently, again, some more adaptations have been received by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Firearms, which has now constituted, and other provinces changing their chief firearms officer from federal to provincial. So Saskatchewan was the first. Now the eastern provinces as well have planned to do this as well. The Bill C-71 was not adapted to what is done. It was not meant to start banning firearms. This has affected not only just firearms owners themselves, but it has also affected museums, historical societies, and any of those that have now firearms that are classified as prohibited. There is no grandfather clause to those societies or museums, and it also affects their insurance policies as well, because now they have to make the firearms cannons defunct, which means that they actually have to have it done professionally by either pouring concrete down the barrel of a cannon, welding up the cannon trigger ports. Old Sharps rifles that are now classified as prohibited will have to be milled or machined, that the action is now open, and of course the value of the firearm is also lost. Prime example would also be our Fort Museum that currently has firearms that are classified now as prohibited. Those firearms would have to actually be dismantled or made dysfunctional, and of course the value of those firearms would also be affected by that. So yeah, there was no planning on the motion that was made in the House or outside of the House of Commons, and so it is my recommendation that we do send a letter to the federal government lobbying that this change to the criminal code be made. If you have any questions, I'd be open to answer.
Are you wishing then to make a motion to that end, according to your recommendation?
Yes, Your Worship, I would like to.
Okay, so motion is on the floor as per the submission that we have. Is there any comments from council? Comments, questions for Councillor Dressler? Debate?
Chair, I'll make a comment, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the work that the Councillor Dressler has done to provide some more information on the law in question. I've done some further research on it myself and the issues involved. I would simply say that at this point I will not be voting in favor of the motion. I don't believe that it's a matter of municipal governance. There are some obvious impacts on individuals within our municipality, perhaps by this law, but I feel like it is an area of federal jurisdiction, and although there are issues about the way it was presented and the form that it had taken, I think I leave those to the federal government and the official opposition parties to party and the other members of the House to deal with those. So I see it more as a political issue and not one of a constitutional issue that is very different than some of the other things that we've made comment on. So I'm simply would not support the motion unless I'm convinced otherwise by the comments of other councillors.
All right, is there any other, you have some response to that, Councillor Dressler? Just in terms of the jurisdiction, perhaps? Do you see there's value in a municipal government sending this letter, or is there other avenues that would be better suited?
A lot of the business owners and or Instructors Association of Alberta, along with other organizations that are governed, including ranges, have submitted letters to our Premier of the province as well. The problem is falling on deaf ears. unless the Premier of Alberta decides to relinquish the federal CFO and put in a provincial CFO in place. But again, I understand Councilor Orr's question on regards to that. That is a federal matter. The problem is again, just the way it was done has affected not just only Albertans, but it's also affected everybody in Canada as well, including all the museums and everything else like that, and historical communities. But again, business owners in Fort Macleod, along with firearms owners, have brought that to question on who really is the voice for them. And that was my take at this, is being the voice for our residents in Fort Macleod.
Mm-hmm. Very well. Anyone else wishing to speak for or against the motion? Councilor Wilson, no? Mike. I think the bill in Quebec.
Well, we didn't actually send any letters. We simply made a statement that was passed by way of a motion.
It's the same thing, really. That's federal politics. I mean, I agree with why we did it, but to me, this is the same thing. That's all.
Well, and that's where I made the distinction. That is a constitutional issue. The notwithstanding clause was invoked to pass a law that was clearly contrary to the Constitution. Really falls into a completely different magnitude based on discrimination, and that speaks very directly to the way in which we view the members of our society. So I draw a distinction. I can see that that question would have been raised here. But again, this, if we have citizens who have issues with this particular law, their course of redress is to write to their MP to voice their concerns through the federal political process. There are many, many, many people who are absolutely in favor of Bill C-71. It's just not, it's not the same kind of issue, in my opinion, as those others.
Thank you, Councilor Orr. All right, is there any other comments, questions for Councilor Dressler? Seeing none, did you have any closing comments, Councilor Dressler, before we call the question as mover of the motion?
No, Your Worship. Again, I have no objections to Councilor Orr's opinion, and I applaud him for that as well. Thank you very much for making your statement and pointing out those values.
Very well. And I'm assuming by this motion you would assist administration in drafting a letter if the motion does pass?
Correct.
All right, then if there's no other comments, we will call it to question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. All right. Moving on then to tax incentive bylaw 1912. And this is one I will be declaring a pecuniary interest on, as we are owners of one of the businesses that have applied in the submission. So I have already prepped Councillor Van Hagbos. He will be chairing this portion of the meeting, so I will pass the chair over to him and exit the room.
Good evening. We'll make this short and sweet, hopefully. In regards to the next item on our agenda, Administration Tax Incentive Bylaw number 1912. And I'd like to pass this over to CEO Sue Keenan to introduce it.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Council. As Council is aware, in January of 2020, the provincial government introduced new legislation to allow municipalities to create and implement a new tax incentive bylaw to encourage growth and new development in our community by way of new build or expansion. In July of 2020, Council, after much consideration and deliberations, approved the tax incentive bylaw with some revisions. So it in fact came into effect on July 13th, 2020. I do want to touch on a couple of things with this bylaw, and bylaws are always about interpretation, and a lot of times there's some gray area that needs to be addressed. And this bylaw will be like any other. It will be open to amendments as we progress. And I do reiterate, this is a new program. So with the July 13th, 2020 date of the bylaw actually being signed off by the mayor and myself, that was the first day that this bylaw came into effect. That being said, and given all the rationale, and I think you've taken the time to read it with regard to the preamble in the bylaw and the various sections in the Municipal Government Act, specifically section 364.2, my recommendation tonight is that council does not accept the applications of M&S Boot Holdings and Franz Fader Construction Limited for the recently passed July 13th, 2020 tax incentive grant via bylaw 1912, because both of those properties were completed prior to the end of 2019.
Thank you, CEO Sukinen. Is anybody prepared to make a motion on this item?
I'll make a motion, Deputy Mayor, for this part to open it up for consultation.
Your motion is to open this up for discussion, or you have an actual motion to approve
Open
or
it.
deny?
Open for discussion.
I believe that's my job as deputy mayor to open it up. I'd like a motion so that we can have the discussion.
I'll have a motion to,
What's the motion? As per recommended, or do
as
you have
per
a?
recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Gressler. Any questions or discussion on the motion? Councillor Monteith.
Do we have to approve every application, or is administration not power to do that?
The way the bylaw has been written is that the applications come to me as your CAO. I review them to see if they've met the criteria as I understand the bylaw, and then I make the recommendation to council on either acceptance or refusal. If you refuse, then I write them a letter and explain why. If you accept, we enter into a formal agreement, which is about 15 pages long. So yes, all of them will come to council for approval or refusal.
Councillor Orr.
I would agree that the purpose of the bylaw was to incentivize investment into our community. It's very clear that someone who has already invested in our community, and especially if the construction is complete before the bylaw was even passed, should not benefit from a bylaw that was set to incentivize. So I would certainly agree with the recommendation, with the motion that's been made, not to accept these two applications. The burning question that we'll need to deal with, and on the ones that follow, is what is that point in which a business is relying upon the tax incentive bylaw to be incentivized to invest in our community. And we can talk more about that when the next matter comes up. But clearly for this one, I would agree that the bylaw can't go, well, it is not drafted to go retroactive. There's no grandfathering clause. Clearly we have to look at the date that the bylaw became effective to assess whether or not someone qualifies for the incentive.
Thank you, Councillor Orr. Any additional questions or discussion? Thank you, Councillor Wolsholm. I have a quick comment in regards to these applicants finding room or explanation in the bylaw to submit an application. That's I agree with the recommendation as a sidebar, but is there any way we can eliminate this going forward, that we don't have individuals who feel that they qualify, put work into this, and then we just deny them based on the actual grounds and intentions of the initial bylaw? Or is, like, a lot of times we'll have an example in a bylaw, like we'll just have example applicant so-and-so, and it kind of does one or two scenarios. Is that something we could do, or?
Absolutely, no question about that. There's a couple of things. One is that we're in a transition phase. This is a new bylaw. It's an incentive bylaw. We're going to have some as we go through the first year. There's no question about that. Example can include the application agreement comes after. We can do those things, no question about that. Is that, whoa, that works even better, is that, you know, when council approves these incentive programs or any program, it really is incumbent on the owners of the business to make a phone call. And in some cases that did happen and it was explained. And in a couple of instances, they wanted to apply anyways because they knew it went past me and went to council. So it really is incumbent, if the businesses are really interested in applying for the tax incentive bylaw, they need to do some legwork initially and contact the town. And we have no problem between Chris and myself. We've tag teamed on this. We will walk through the entire process with any business that's either coming to town or wants to expand or create a new business in town.
Thank you, CEO Keenan. I just want to mention as well that obviously these businesses are appreciated, what they've done. Their investment in this community is not pushed to the wayside, but as council, I think we were very aware as to the reasoning behind this bylaw, and that was to spur future investment in this community. With that being said, if we don't have any additional questions or comment, I would like to call this motion to question. All in favor? Any against? We can call the chair back in. Welcome back.
All right. Carrying on then with administrative item number 2, tax incentive bylaw 1912. Ask Ms. CEO Keenan to introduce this for us.
Thank you, Mayor Fader. With respect to tax incentive bylaw 1912 applications, administration is recommending tonight that council does approve the application of Triple B Car Wash Limited for the recently passed July 13th, 2020 tax incentive grant, and directs administration to enter into an agreement with this business for a 3-year period. I will also advise that a development permit for this business was issued. It's development permit number 014-20 on March 31st, 2020.
Okay. Anyone prepared to make a motion on this? Councillor Wilson will make the motion as per the recommendation. Yeah. Any questions for administration? This obviously would be the first one. If I understand correctly, they will still pay their taxes, but then get a credit for the municipal improvement portion later next year, correct?
As it stands right now, that is correct.
Right, so it's potentially true that they could have applied next October and been in the same position,
Correct.
correct? So this would be early, this would not have any financial implications on the town until late next year, is my understanding right?
My understanding is that the assessment on property will be done, it's done later in the year, November, December. So the 2020 tax assessment on this property will be completed for the 2021 cycle. And what I do with each of these is I create a separate file for each application that's approved. We work through the agreement, put that in place, and then we specify the years that it'll come into play. So year one will be the 100%, then the 75%, then the 50%. And we do know that these grants could be perpetuated over roughly 9 years, depending on when they're applied for. So say somebody applies in 2022, it could potentially be right through 25, 26 before they finish their 3-year cycle.
Based on when they start construction.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of dates and they can stretch for quite some time, and just hope that these people that are applying understand that they're not getting a check once this is approved. It's not until a year from now that they will see that.
I would suggest that the bylaw is pretty specific on how that's going to unfold through each of the various sections. But when we go through the agreement portion of it, that we sit down with each of the business owners and work through, they will be advised of that, and the details are highlighted in those agreements.
Any other questions for administration?
And the agreement, the first year, is that the full finished assessed value, or is that if the assessment happens, as mentioned at the beginning of the year, November, December, and they're quarterways through their construction period of 6 to 12 months or 2 years, and they now have half of their assessment, does that first year apply to the half of the assessment?
Correct.
And that is based on their the date they apply, or that's just based on when the rebate starts, like when the rebate, the incentive starts. It starts in the year of the application, or can an applicant apply the following year? Is that?
It's always going to be based on the tax assessment. So let's use this new one, because Chris and I were talking about this today, the one that we're dealing with right now. Is they got their development permit issued in 2020. They've started construction. Let's say they're only 80% finished by the end of the fiscal year, which is December. And that's when our assessor comes out and does all the new assessments. For next year, for 2021, they will get 100% of the increased value of assessment over 50,000 up to whatever that 80% translates into. In the following year, when they're finished 100% of their building, then they'll get the 75% applied to the tax assessment benefit. That's the way it reads right now. That's the way I'm interpreting it to read. And then in the third year, then it's 50% of that full assessed value.
Okay. And I'm sure if we have any other questions on the particulars of that bylaw, we can do that. For now, I think we have an application in front of us that you're seeking council's approval to continue on with the journey on. Is there any other questions on this application?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Councilor Orr.
This is an issue that I alluded to earlier. The first few applications on this incentive bylaw is the one where we're going to iron out some details. I appreciated Councillor Van Huigenbos's question earlier about providing clarity to those who might seek to qualify for this incentive. We want to provide clarity and correct answers, not correct, but clarity so that they know what they can or can't do. We don't want them investing time and then getting rejected when they could have been told at the outset that, no, you don't qualify. So I appreciate that. But initially, the question is, when is the incentive available? The bylaw was passed July 13th, is that correct? Correct. That's when this bylaw came into existence. I have a hard time extending this incentive to an applicant who had already applied, already had a development permit. It's pretty hard to say that this bylaw incentivized them to build in our community when they have already acquired a development permit and are committed to building. I've reviewed the bylaw in detail again, and my reading of the bylaw is, and again, this is an issue that needs to be identified. It's going to come up. This is one that we have to identify right off the start, is that in my opinion, those businesses that have acquired their development permit after the bylaw has come into effect, those are the ones that are incentivized to build in our community, to invest in our community. And for that reason, I would be very open to some sort of reasoning that would suggest that someone who's acquired a development permit prior to this bylaw even existing, I can't see how they could qualify for the incentive when they've already commenced the process of investing in our community by way of new construction or renovation. We're not talking about the purchase of land, because someone can purchase land and not invest further for years and years. But this bylaw was designed to incentivize people to put out the money now and build new or to have a substantial renovation. And for that reason, if a development permit has been granted before the bylaw even existed, I don't believe that that qualifies. There's no grandfathering clause. There's no clarity with respect to that in the bylaw. I think it was just rightly assumed that it would be from July 13th on once the bylaw is effective. It does say the effective date is the date that third reading occurs. And so for that reason, I appreciate the investment of this business in our community, but one of the concerns that we had when we discussed the tax incentive bylaw is that we weren't going to give up tax revenue to those businesses that have already made the commitment to invest in our community. So I would say that that is a critical criteria. If the development permit is post the bylaw coming into existence, that would be the critical determinant in whether or not someone qualifies to meet all of the other qualifications of the bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Orr. Does anyone else want to chime in? Councillor Monteith?
I would disagree with you, David. I think it's when they start construction, because just because you got a development permit doesn't mean you're going to go ahead with construction. That's just one piece of the puzzle. So until they actually start building, you don't know that project's going ahead. And so in that regard, this project didn't start till after we passed this, so I'm in favor of the incentive.
Anyone else? Councillor Van Aarbos?
I agree and disagree to your comments in a sense. The development permit is a one-year development. It's in effect for 1 year, and you can get an extension. I've been involved in that, and a lot of times it has to do with it's a step in a plan that you need to know if the plan is it's a viable plan. You need a development permit for. It's a first step approval for a specific use, for a specific business, for a specific detail to the actual property, etc. It doesn't guarantee construction. So as much as I agree that there are going to be businesses who have full intention of building, I think that is a tough line to draw from one case to the next case, from a council or from a CAO perspective. And that's why I think we have to make a decision on either development permit or construction, and I feel that construction is the actual motion of proceeding. Shovel in the ground this is happening. Thank you.
So you're speaking in favor of the motion?
I'm
Marion?
speaking in favor of the motion, sorry.
Okay. Anyone else wishing to speak for or against the motion or questions for administration? Councillor Orr, you have your light on?
Just, do we know when, if the shovel in the ground is the critical point? You're suggesting that if the shovel in the ground occurred after July 13th, then there is the argument that they were incentivized by this bill, and therefore they should qualify. Do I understand your position correctly?
That's my understanding of the argument, yes.
Okay, so then my question would be, if that were the line in the sand, quite literally, are we somehow able to determine at this point whether or not construction had occurred prior to July 13th?
That's a great question. What was the date?
July 13th.
July
I'm
13th?
sure it was after that.
It's been a very rapid development. I was involved in the pre-development regarding the permits and stuff through the MPC, and they were very excited to start, but then things actually didn't happen for a while. So I'm not 100% on the timeline. I just remember one day there was all sorts of activity there.
Yeah, and I can, what I'm looking for is some clarity as to when do you qualify, when do you not? What constitutes beginning construction? Somebody drives out in their pickup and takes out their shovel and says, this is where the corner of my building's going to be, and they put a shovel mark in the ground. Did they start construction even though they don't bring anything in for 2, 3, 4 months later? And again, this is only an issue that's going to arise at the beginning of this tax incentive, and so maybe this is the only one that we're going to face, but there may be other businesses out in the wings that said, you know, we had our development permit back in November of last year, but we didn't actually start construction until July 30th. So we'll qualify, and so we may be opening the door here to a number of businesses whose development permits go way back. And is that what we want? Is that the trigger? To me, the development permit time is a very specific date. We know when it was issued, and from that point forward. So I appreciate that differing line, and I appreciate the reasoning for that, and I can see that a development permit exists for a year. And so there may be some incentive to move forward sooner rather than later, but
Councillor Dressler, you had some comments?
Yes, Your Worship. I jogged my head around this one a couple of times because I kind of agree with Councillor. When you're issued a development permit, that's the set date that was originally set in stone for your development. Yeah, you have a whole entire year, but again, I agree with Councillor. If you wait a whole entire year and then do the construction and then say, well, hey, you know what, I did it after for the incentive, it's really not fair for those who are actually doing the development permit after the date that the incentive was originally installed. So is there room for leeway? No, I'm not in favor of that, so.
Councillor Wilson.
I can see everybody's point here, I think, but I do agree that construction date is the most important, I think, because we know in here, lots of people have got development permits who haven't built. So I think construction point is the most important.
Councillor Vanagabas, another comment?
In regards to these comments, I am aware of one particular individual who has a development permit and who is in limbo right now regarding many things. I'm going to try to pick his brain a bit, but COVID being one, just fiscal outlook on his industry, funding, his own funding. So a lot of these things play into a decision, and I believe incentives will add to that. So development permit is great, but I do think that the construction, when construction commences, is my position anyways. So, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I would speak in favor of the motion. I do believe it should be based on start of construction. For many of the other reasons already mentioned, the contractor has skin in the game when he signs the final deal with the person building the project. That's when the decision's made. It's not made at the development stage. The development stage is just to get the paperwork in place, so you at least have the option to build. The building permit is actually when they make the final decision right on the bottom line with the contractor or whoever is building the building. And that's when they're committed. That's when they are following through and investing in the community. Development permit, in my mind, is not yet solid enough reasoning for an investment in the community.
So then, just for some clarification, are you suggesting then that the issuance of the building permit would be that point in time when, because I think now's the time when we need to clarify this, and I see the merit in your argument there. So I'm just, rather than us trying to figure out what constitutes the beginning of construction, is there something, if a building permit is issued, is that the point in time that,
I would have to.
so long as that occurs after July 13th, then they would be open to apply?
I think we would have to defer that to administration to give us some feedback, because if it's not based on the building permit, then what other trigger could it be possibly based on if it's not the development permit? So whether it's pictures of a foundation in the ground or what have you, I'm not sure what it is. But a building permit would be tangible, but there is still a delay with, once you get a building permit, they can still delay it to some degree, but usually the builder is involved with the building permit, so that's where the contractor.
I just am uncomfortable with leaving it when construction started, because that's such a nebulous thing. If we can provide some further clarity as to, because again, it's just so that the business community knows I have to meet this criteria. Either I have to have a building permit that was issued after July 13th.
I think the
And then, of
trigger-
course, with this particular application, we need to make sure that this particular application complies with whatever we decide is that triggering event.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, I'm not sure what a good trigger for administration would be, but I know maybe it's a signed contract with the builder. I'm not sure, because it is a commercial enterprise.
Yep.
Chances are it's going to be obvious.
I'd certainly be open to
Does
suggestions if you
administration
have some
any
idea.
feedback on this?
Well, the application process doesn't have a specific area for whether it's a development permit number or when construction starts, and maybe that's an oversight that we missed in terms of getting this process started. I think I just want to reference that there is some latitude here. This is the first year of this grant program. This particular individual, yes, got his development permit in March of 2020. I think along the same lines as three of the other councillors that spoke before, in that means that they're looking at building something. That doesn't mean it's going to be started construction today. What that other issue of a building permit, or when the application comes in, they identify when construction starts, and we do it based on believing in what the application states. Really and truly, that's the only course we have, unless we're going out driving around the community every day just seeing who's starting building when. But I think after this year, it's really not going to be overly relevant. It's just getting us to start this grant application.
All right, discussion's been had. Is there any closing comments from the mover? I think Councillor Wilson moved it, right? Very good. No further comments? No other discussions?
So I just want to be clear, are we clear on what is, so we're not defining a trigger here, so
I'm going to suggest that for this first year, that council show some latitude with regard to this particular application because the development permit, although issued in March, is for a full year before they have to go back and get not a continuance, that's court term, but get reissued another, well, extension, correct.
So I know that doesn't accurately answer your question. I think the whole idea is to give some flexibility when they start. In my mind, it's, I don't have the exact date when they started, but I'm quite confident it was after July 13th. Adrian has a comment? Uh-oh.
So I just quickly checked my records. I was dealing with them back in the end of July, just finalizing some civil drawings. So they started
Definitely after July.
shortly after then. So end of July, early August.
So if then we are agreed that it's kind of when construction starts, if that's the nebulous time period, whatever that is, then at least they're consistent with that. And I don't know who else is out there, but if someone else got a development permit in, say, February, and they started their construction in beginning of June, and they apply thinking that, well, this other business got in, and so, well, here we've got construction started after the bylaw came into effect, whereas this, unless we make it clear, this other business could say, well, we applied, and they may think that they qualify as well. So I don't know if there's
In
others
my
out there
mind,
that might apply.
There might be one other situation where it's close.
Yeah,
But,
and so that's the thing,
that's
is
the
this
best
isn't a
one.
one-off. This is setting the mark for others who may qualify for this. And so with that clarification, I'm
Thank you for that. Councillor Dressler, you had a last comment?
Last comment, and I just, for clarification, how is this, like, because this was a provincial incentive when this came out, how is it standing when it becomes legally if somebody were to challenge it in court?
Yes, I don't believe it's a provincial incentive. It gave us permissions from the province to be able to do it. Doesn't tie the province to anything.
No, but if somebody were to challenge this in court,
Still based on our own bylaw. Yep. Yep. Very good. Councillor Vanagas.
Sorry, just a quick question in regards to the application. I imagine they have to fill out information regarding value, and that we're able to guesstimate or put a number on assessment. Like, does the applicant have a value of the property that they come forward with, just so we're aware of what we're actually incentivizing until, we'll get an actual once the assessor comes out, but I would think the application would need to put a value on the property as built or as pair drawings, something the applicant should have. I'm just curious, do we have that in the application currently?
For the one that we're talking about right now?
Correct, in general, but as this is the first one.
Yes, they make an estimate of what they believe the cost of that building will be. And of course, that does not translate to an assessed value, but we do have an idea of what the cost will be, yes.
Thank you.
All right, so discussion's been had, the motion's on the floor. I'd like to call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you very much. Carrying on to item 3, administration Fortis Alberta's franchise fee, which we get every year for discussion and approvals. Director of Finance Chris Holbeck is speaking to this.
Good evening, Council. It is our annual Fortis franchise fee review for 2021. Per the recommendation, I am recommending that we leave the electric distribution franchise fee for 2021 at 15%.
Is on the, or is someone prepared to make the motion? Sorry, Councillor Monteith. Councillor Monteith makes the motion. Is there any questions for administration? Any discussion? Call the question, all in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. We have item 4, which is reserve transfer to operating. I will pass this over to Director of Finance, Chris Holbeck, again for comment.
Thank you, Mayor Fader. So the specifics on this one, Sue will jump in and help me out with this one, but at the end of last year, we transferred $30,000 into a reserve, and it was the filming net proceeds from our filming revenues, and council in a motion did earmark it for the pool project. But as per our reserve policy, if we want to move things in and out of reserves, council has to make that motion. So it's back tonight, and the CAO has asked that $20,000 of that amount that we put into the reserve be moved back into operations to fund some operating costs for the swimming pool project. Thank you.
Sounds very good. Is anyone prepared to make a motion on this? Councillor Van Hagenbos makes a motion. Is there any questions for council, for administration on this item? Councillor Orr?
I just have to say, it seems like we're doing a dance with our funds here. It says that we're moving this to cover the costs of promoting the fundraising efforts for this project. We haven't hired anybody else to do the promoting other than some contract work, I'm assuming, with our external advertising with Carmen. Okay, I'm just mulling over in my own mind the sensitivity towards, this being set aside and being communicated to our citizens that money was set aside, earmarked for the pool. I think most would think that's capital. I can see the argument being made that it is going towards the pool. I want to be consistent with what we've told our community to start with. And so it's a little bit of a twist. $20,000 to cover the promoting of the fundraising effort. That might be seen as pretty rich for that. Do we have any indication as to how we came up with that $20,000? Obviously, you want to reply to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Fader. In response to Councillor Orr's question, which is a very good one, during that discussion last year, when I put the motion forward for this reserve funding, it was, with all intents and purposes, to be added to the fundraising initiative for the capital component of the pool. From that $30,815.65 we got last year with regard to the filming monies that came in, approximately $10,200 and something were set aside and checked off for the costs that it actually cost the town of Fort Macleod for the manpower that we provided. So the remaining $20,000 was the net excess funding that we had with respect to that.
Okay. Any further comments, Councillor Orr? Questions? So I think when I read it, like the original submission made it sound like it was, strictly for the marketing, but in the second page, it almost sounded like it was to put back into the fundraising for the actual pool. So I was, in some ways, I was a little mixed on what was being asked. But. So So is everyone clear on the recommendation? If so, if there's no other comments, the motion's on the floor. We will call it the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. All right, carrying on to new business item 5. We have a request for waiver of penalties and interest. We'll pass it over to Director of Finance, Chris Holbeck.
Thank you, Mayor Fader. This is our one and only this year. Request for waiver of penalties and interest for the 2020 tax year. I've provided council with the letter from the applicant, and based on my investigation and my review of the tax penalty bylaw and administering it day to day, administration's recommendation is to deny.
Anyone prepared to make a motion on this agenda?
Yes, Your Worship. I would like to make a motion in favor of the recommendation as per administration.
So motion to deny the request for waiver of penalties and taxes?
That is correct.
All right, to that end, is there any questions for administration on this agenda item? Comments, debate, Council Venaglos?
Just a quick question, and maybe this question should be in a couple of minutes when we get to the actual tax recovery public auction, but that document states that all properties are paid in full. Does that not apply to this property? I'll wait with my question until we discuss the tax recovery public auction. Sorry about that.
All right, so motion is on the floor. Is there any other comments, discussion? See none, we'll call it the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. Municipal Operating Support Transfer Grant, item 6, Director of Finance, Chris Holbeck.
Thank you, Mayor Fader. So we were all very excited that we were going to get some operational funding from the province of Alberta, and we got the schedule, and the town of Fort Macleod was going to get we were earmarked for about $303,000, and things were pretty rosy until we read the guidelines of the grant. And as I put in my submission, the federal and provincial governments have set up this funding to assist municipalities with the incremental operating costs incurred due to COVID, and as well as other operating losses or deficits incurred as a result of COVID-19 impacts on revenue and operations. So we have lots of that stuff in all municipalities in Alberta. So we're not sure exactly what our numbers are going to be at the end of this. So this grant goes from April 1st of this year until March 31st of 2021. So we've got a year end, our year ends in there for the town of Fort Macleod of December 31st. So our recommendation is that we apply to the province, that we will be accessing this grant. Once you sign the agreement, they send you the money. And then you have to show them what your incremental costs for COVID were and what your actual operational losses were. We think we're probably going to, we're not sure. Sue and I have discussed it and run some numbers and did some estimations. We don't think we're going to be able to max out the total amount that we are allowed to access from the grant, but we will use whatever that we can based on our financial situation up until our year end this year and until March 31st next year. So our recommendation is that we sign it and we enter into this agreement, and then we will day by day figure out how we have spent this grant, and I will continue to give council updates on the grant and how much we've accessed from the grant in a timely manner. But for now, all I can say is we will use some of this grant, and we need to enter into the agreement so it doesn't just fall away and go to a different municipality.
Councillor Dressler, are you making a motion?
Yes, Your Worship. I would like to make a motion in favor of the recommendation to enter into a municipal operations support transfer memorandum of agreement as per the recommendation.
Very well, motion's on the floor. Is there any questions? CEO Keenan.
Just wanting to clarify that our estimates as of the last couple of days, well, just before Thanksgiving, we're anticipating we'll be able to collect about 50% of that grant, or $150,000 at this time, based on losses for pool revenue, arena revenue, community hall rental revenue, those kinds of things. So those are what we're really monitoring quite closely now so that we can show those deficits.
Councillor Wolstenholme.
If we're only going to use half of it, I know there's been problems at the rink with how much, whether they want to use the washrooms. I'm not getting in whether that's right or wrong or whatever, but that would be, you could hire somebody just to clean the washrooms and get paid out of that. Is that not correct? Yeah, that's just a suggestion.
Yes, this grant is supposed to, the incremental cost of COVID, so the additional janitorial that the rink needs or the library needs, that kind of thing, that's all covered with this.
I think too, if I could just jump in here, we have since the beginning of COVID and continue to implement pretty much everything that Alberta Health Services has sent our way with regard to recommendations. I don't want to deviate too much from that, although sport seems to be a bit of a gray area. So we're trying to get a little more clarification. Utilizing the confined dressing rooms, in my mind, is a bit problematic with regard to overall health, especially, and I mean, teenagers don't typically shower after hockey games, and that's not a good thing either, but in this case, it probably is. But we'll look into that in terms of additional cleaning, but we do have a process in place right now that minor hockey's been briefed on. And we'd like to see where that goes before we look at opening more dressing rooms and hiring more staff, because that's going to take some time, and hockey is already underway.
So motion is on the floor. Councillor Monteith, you had a question?
So we're losing revenue on the pool and the arena, but we're also saving money because we don't have all the expense. So this grant, does it look at the net, or does it just look at revenue we're losing?
It looks at the revenue we're losing, and it looks at both. I can't even distinguish that. There's really a big difference, but you got to remember our biggest cost, about 60% of our cost to operate our recreational facilities, is staffing. And regardless of whether we're bringing in revenue or not, we still have the staff. We don't have the casual staff, but we definitely have our permanent staff. So they're still working, and there's still that significant cost.
Very good. Councillor Wolstenholme.
I understand the problem, what you're talking about, but I know minor hockey is quite upset about this. And so I would think this might be a win-win if it doesn't cost us any more money. And I know you understand about COVID and everything, but we're funneling them all to one bathroom, right? Everybody who wants to go to the bathroom's got to go to the public washroom. So there's way more use in that public bathroom now. And actually, the teenagers in this town do shower after games.
Yes.
I've had them, I know that.
just to clarify. All right, is there any other comments?
Just one other, and I don't know whether the link can be made, but I just think about the Empress Theater Society as to whether or not they are enough of a town organization. They're quite separate, I recognize, but they've certainly experienced losses as well. And I don't know, given the specifics of this grant, as to whether or not any of their losses, obviously their revenue streams have suffered a severe hit, and they've still maintained some of their costs. And so I would just say, as you're processing that, if you would be sure to look and see whether or not there may be some qualification there. Again, I recognize that may be a stretch, but I just raised that for
The
consideration.
programming component for the Empress and all of the shows that they've had to cancel, they would not be eligible because they're a nonprofit society standalone. However, we can look at the utility bills and things that are a constant charge that we still have to maintain over the course of this. And because it's a town-owned building, we could definitely apply for the loss of revenues that offset those utility costs. So we are looking at every avenue we can, and we'll capitalize on as much of that money as we can.
Councilor Dressler?
So my question would be for, well, you and Adrian, can some of this also be looked at for our parks and recreation outside of the facilities, including for the water that you had to be done and the grass trimming and all that stuff? Well, because the thing is, we opened the parks so that people could actually venture. So we were doing a lot of staffing. So of course there's utilities, especially like the water park and stuff like that.
But that was standard operational, that we would have paid that anyway. So this is things that were, because of COVID, we were forced to close basically. And our park staff did a great job this summer in keeping our ball diamonds and everything trimmed up, and the water usage was typically what we would have.
But even when the facilities were not in use?
Yep. We only pay for what we use.
Okay.
So I know I was at an Alberta Southwest meeting, and one of the councilors there last week mentioned it. He's like, "Did you guys see this? We're getting X amount of dollars from the feds in the province." And I was like, "What?" And then I seen it on our package. So I think everyone's like, "Oh my, what in the world?" So I have full confidence that administration is going to do their best to and get as much out of this as they can, unless council decides we don't want this money. We can save the feds in the province $300,000. I take that as a no. All right, so motion's on the floor. We'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. Moving on to item 7, 2020 tax recovery public auction. This is for information only, I believe. We'll ask Director of Finance Chris Holbeck to present.
Okay, last one, yay. 2020 tax recovery public auction, we didn't have one, got canceled. So of the 5 properties that council had on their agenda to put into the public auction, and you set the terms and conditions and you set the reserve bids, of those, 2 paid their taxes in full and got themselves out of the public auction, and 3 entered into tax agreements with the town of Fort Macleod. So these are formal tax agreements. They take the amount that's owed by the property. They flow it out for 3 years because it has to be down to 0 within 3 years. They add in the taxes that are going to be added on to that bill every year at tax time. They add in the penalties. So at the end of 3 years, the monthly payment, or whatever the payment arrangement that we've made with the property owner is, by the end of 3 years, they're at a 0 balance. So that's how it works. So the only thing I will say about it is if they default on their tax agreement with the town of Fort Macleod, then it is possible to reactivate the auction process immediately. So in that case, it takes approximately 90 days to complete the auction, and typically our contractor tax service will just add the property in with the properties in the next upcoming auction. So we do this annually. So they would just get slotted in with that year's auction. So there is, we don't have to start again. So we don't have to start, and it's a 3-year process like when they're first on the tax recovery program. So it's 90 days and they get thrown into the auction of the current year. So we're very pleased. The town of Fort Macleod never wants to take over a private property if we don't have to. We work very hard to come to some sort of an agreement with the property owner. And we are flexible on our payment arrangements. Some people would like to do them bi-monthly, monthly. They'd like to defer them for a few months because they have other things going on and they want to start them later but pay more monthly. Fine with us. We work with everybody to ensure that it's a win-win at the end of the day. And so there was no public auction, and we will do this all again next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Imagine this saves you some time and energy, correct? Yeah. So motion to accept this information, please. Councillor Dressler makes the motion. Called question, all in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. Moving on then to item number 8, sale of land to Foothill Center. And before we begin discussion, I just want to declare that I am sitting on the board of this organization, but have no pecuniary interest at all. So, is any, maybe I'll ask CEO Keenan to open this item for us, and then we will.
Thank you, Mayor Fader. I am going to defer this to our Director of Operations as it comes under development.
All right, deferred.
Thank you, Council. So this submission is in relation to the piece of town land that we recently removed the municipal reserve designation on, and that's adjacent to the Foothill Center. So this submission is asking that Council accept the offer that we've received from the Foothill Center for purchasing that piece of property for $10,000. And a condition of that sale would be that parcel gets consolidated into their current parcel there. So
Is anyone prepared to make a motion on this agenda item? Councilor Van Eyckbos. As per the recommendation. Any further discussion, questions? Seeing none, we will call it the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Moving on then to item 9, a little bit of a fun one. We'll pass it over to our Director of Operations, Adrian Pedro.
So this this submission is my most colorful submission to date. I'm just so presenting to council 2 options based on some administrative decisions in terms of what we want the mechanical room to look like. Just throwing it out there for council discussion and input, not necessarily for a decision, but I know it is a big portion of the project and it will be quite visible in the area, so just kind of throwing it out there. I know administratively we do have our preference. I think it would be for the more muted color combination. So just curious to see what council says. Correct.
I gotta just jump in here. When we were looking at these colors, because this was one of our fun times that we had in the office, if they had been primary colors, we would have been all over it. The bright reds, the bright greens, the bright blues, but we couldn't quite get to the primary color portion.
So I guess administration's looking for a little bit of feedback from council, how interested they are in something a little bit outside the box or something a little safer. So I guess that's the feedback they're looking for today. Councillor Dressler.
When I saw the blah blue and blah gray or white, it kind of reminded me of the water treatment plant. of our last tour, so I was all over the multicolor earth tony look that you presented in your second image, and I would be in favor of that color. I actually like that. I think it really updates and makes it more presentable.
Well, I don't know how close we're gonna get agreement on this, but I think you'll get some feedback and then you can gauge where you go from there. So Councillor Orr, you had some comments?
I was, is there any consideration of any change in the colors of the arena itself? Like, how will this fit in with that building? How will it fit in with, if the slide, when the slide is eventually made, what color will that be, and will this be consistent with that? I probably kind of lean towards the second set of drawings myself, but these are, but I was just wondering about other structures and colors there. That I know that there's kind of a blue predominance of blue in the current building, and so maybe the top one is consistent with that.
Yeah, correct. That's why we went with the blue roof and white combo initially, just to tie in better with the adjacent building. The arena doesn't get painted that often.
Yeah.
So we wanted something to be a little bit more consistent. The color of the potential slide, that's slightly open. I know in our designs that's an orange color, so it's kind of hard to say. We could go and have a little fun with it. The question is whether in 5 or 10 years we'll regret that decision.
I'd just like to quick highlight, like even on the first one, it looks like a gray, but if you look at the color call-out, it's bright white. So because there's so many lines in the graphic, it's not a true representation of what it's going to be. So it'd be a bright white and then the blue roof. So it closer matched the current colors of the existing building. The other one, even though the blue, you have to watch the blue because there's a lot of black lines in there as well. So it's probably going to be a brighter blue than what it looks. Yeah, so you have to use some discretion. This modeling was scanned after it was sent via, so C.O. Keenan.
One more little tidbit of information I thought I'd throw in is because, you know, we really did look at the demographics for this facility, and the biggest component of users is kids. So we did ask a child to actually pick the colors of the second design that you've got in front of you based on the color palette we had to choose from. So I just throw that in there.
Yeah, for sure. Adrian.
Not to bring it back towards more adult themes, but technically that facility is in the provincial historic area, so we should be trying to match.
Are you saying history wasn't colorful?
No, I'm not saying that. But if we are going by the bylaw, it should fit into the nature of the area.
So not bright orange carpets. All right, any other feedback? Go ahead, Councillor Dressler.
I still point that, yes, okay, granted that you had a child pick the colors. I do like the colors because it does present also the summer, fall, and autumn colors as well. And also includes also too with the trees and the aesthetic of the park area that's also included in that area. So it does brighten it up and give it a lively look. And I also like the colors too of our water park because again too, it's bright, but of course if you put in some shrubbery and some other things that will actually fit. So I think, again, I like the earth tone colors a lot more than just having a bright white and blue roof.
Very well. Councillor Monteith.
I would lean toward the second one too.
Okay. Councillor Wilson, anything?
My wife told me that she liked the second one best. So I'm going to stay there.
Councillor Van Hagenbos, any comments?
Other than the comments made by operations, I too lean to scenario 2. It just fits more with the use of the complete facility. It's probably going to be my kids, not me, and colors matter. So.
So unless there's some really strong reasons why we can't do the colorful theme, then seems to me that you have the support of council for that, but I think we will leave that still largely up to administration to help figure out, right? So,
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
all right, well, thank you.
Great job on the coloring. You stayed in the lines.
And can we thank our young opportunist that provided you with the colors?
All right, thank you, everyone. We'll carry on to administrative reports. We have 5 tonight. CEO Keenan, how did you want to, is there anything you wanted to highlight, or how do you want to go through these?
I would, if you don't mind,
ahead.
with the caveat that our Director of Community and Protective Services is unable to be here tonight because of a family tragedy, and we do send our condolences to them. But she does have some things she would like to address with council, so I'd like to carry her report into the last meeting in October with your permission.
Very well.
That being said, in terms of the CAO report, we're down to quarterly reports. So this is my quarterly report ending September 30th, 2020. Just wanted to give you a quick update on the Safe Community Task Force. There has been significant progress being made around the entire community with an emphasis on 10th and 11th Street. We are making some headway with drug dealers, stolen property, and abandoned and delinquent buildings. There will be a detailed report coming to council on, when is it coming to council? October 26th. And there will also be a second town hall meeting where we're updating all our residents on crime, the task force, and other policing initiatives in November. And I believe the November date has been changed to the 19th. Land sales we talked about earlier this evening, so you've got that as information. The intermunicipal collaborative frameworks, as council's aware, Mayor Fader and I are meeting tomorrow night with our regional CAOs and representatives to discuss recreation. The RFP for a consultant closes on Friday. The CAOs will be meeting next week to talk about the recreation component of it. And tomorrow's the entire committee of elected officials and CAOs, and there's quite a few things on the agenda. So I'm sure Brent will have a report, or Mayor Fader will have a report for you at the next meeting. The intermunicipal development plan we talked about a little bit earlier today. Very pleased with the pool fundraiser. We had a really good presentation last week at Skoogles. And I want to thank Frank for the great overhead photo. It was nice for those councillors that came out, and I believe the entire staff of Skoogles was on hand, and it was a very positive experience. So tonight we throw down the gauntlet to other businesses in the community to pick up the challenge of Skoogles' $50,000 donation towards the pool. We will be contacting you shortly. We've sent out our corporate packages last week. And so Carmen and I and Miranda will start doing follow-up personal phone calls with each of those businesses. The other only thing I wanted to mention was I wanted to mention the Gifts in Kind program as well, and I want to thank council wholeheartedly for championing the building, the utilities building that we're getting built. You know, there's a lot of things that happen in our community. And it's because of the goodwill and the financial support that we get from our business community. And To all of you that reached out to those individuals, thank you for that. And to those individual companies that also have indicated they are going to contribute. It has been overwhelming and it's been a significant gesture. And on behalf of the town of Fort McLeod and my staff, I'd like to thank each and every one of those businesses for what they've decided to contribute to that new, bright, beautiful building that we're going to have for the new pool. The last thing I will let council know is we are starting our collective agreement negotiations on November 16th. Our proposal is ready to go. I understand the union proposal is ready to go, so I'm hoping that it will be a shorter process than the last one was, but we'll keep you posted. So for my report, unless there's any questions, that's pretty much it.
I think going back to the one we had, you noted in here that 20,000 from the town of Fort McLeod was for the fundraising. That's where I had gotten that.
Oh,
That's where I seen that as a donation, not as marketing, but that's fine.
Okay.
That's all very good. Thank you.
the second item is the council motion list. Again, this is presented quarterly. I leave that with you for your reading pleasure. We indicate when we've completed motions or where we're at with specific things. I believe administration and the staff have done a great job this year in getting to a very good point with all of these. I will leave this with you. If you have any questions, I would hope that you would raise them at the next meeting. Oh, but if you have a question now, because you've read it, that's wonderful.
I have read it. Quick question for operations regarding the 13th Street repaving project. Is that still in the plans for this year, or will that be pushed to next year?
Yeah, unfortunately, that one likely won't get done this year. So as council knows, the intent was to include it as part of the phase 1 of the Southwest Industrial. Just due to timing and some final design issues on that road, it's not going to get done, so we'll be deferring that amount for 2021.
Thank you. But we do have established a cost in a sense. Like I know this was approved based on budget,
Correct.
but you've since done due diligence.
Yeah, we have a cost on it, and it'll be
Okay,
within budget.
thank you.
Any other questions on this? Okay, the motion update. Next report is from our Director of Financial Services, and I'm going to ask Chris to provide her highlights.
I don't know what to highlight, just day after day, working with the numbers.
Will you entertain questions?
Yeah, I'll take questions. I don't have much to say.
The designated officer bylaw investigation for potential 2021 developments, what does that refer to?
So within the MGA, the CAO can designate officers to take care of certain sections of the MGA. So development officer takes care of certain portions of the MGA. So instead of Sue having to make a motion or council make a motion that so-and-so is a designated officer to do this duty, there's a bylaw. It lists each of our positions and which portions of the MGA that we're the designated officer for. So I would be the designated officer for taxation. There's certain sections of the MGA that talk about collecting taxes. That's me. So it's a lot of communities have them. It just streamlines the designated officer process, and it becomes a function of our job descriptions and the duties of designated officers that falls within our job description. So it's quite streamlined, and it's quite nice to have, and I think we really need one. So I'm working on it.
That sounds cool. Anything else you wanted to report on?
Chris, I'm just wondering if you might touch on just briefing council on the Daisy May campground in case they get any phone calls.
Maybe Adrian wants to weigh in on that one later on in his report.
That was nice. That was a good handoff. Anything else in your report or questions for our Director of Finance? Seeing none, we will pass it over then to our Director of Operations.
Thank you, Council. I'll start off with Daisy May because that one wasn't included in my report, but I'll wing it. So at this point, we have had discussions with the current landowner, the Pascals, and the potential purchaser of the campground. The current owners are pretty eager to sell. They're tired of running the business, and this new potential buyer is quite interested. He does have quite an ambitious plan for the campsite. He wants to expand it by roughly double its current size. So there's roughly 100 lots in there. He wants to increase that to about 200 and add some other amenities on the property. From the town's perspective, it's a little bit problematic because there's a lot of pieces of parcels in there. One of them being an environmental reserve, so we need to deal with that somehow.
Is this by any chance an in-camera discussion? There's no reasons?
No.
No? Okay, it
So-
just sounds like it's something that's in discussions and so that.
Just preliminary discussions at this point. So we're essentially just working with the landowner and the purchaser to see what options are available should anything wish to proceed. So
Very good. Anything else on your report you want to highlight?
we got quite a bit of work done, especially considering sort of COVID and some holidays that we're pushing the guys to use. In Public Works, we're kind of getting down to the wire for a number of projects, sidewalk replacement being one of them. We did complete the removals last week, and McNally's is supposed to come in this week and complete that. So hopefully we can do that before the weather turns for the worst here. Water treatment, well, plants in general, EPCOR review they've completed their site inspection and all their document collection. So at this point, they're just drafting their reports. We'll be getting that in October. And then at this point, we'll bring it back to council at some point in November. Facilities and parks, we did get a lot of smaller and larger projects done. There's a few items on the go. Devonian walkways signage that has been manufactured. It's currently being painted. So that installation date of mid-October is going to get pushed back a little bit. So we're probably looking at early November. So weather permitting, that'll get done quite soon. Rosewood Villa under development, that's well documented at this point. Major projects, Southwest Industrial and outdoor pool replacement are obviously the big ones. Southwest Industrial is about 6 days behind at this point. They have submitted an updated schedule. It's a little bit more detailed than what they've provided to date. Their completion date is out. It's past the contract completion date. So we're just working through that now. Next year, when they start up, they are going to be bringing in multiple crews. So we're hoping that they can shrink down their completion date. But we'll have to wait and see. Outdoor pool replacement project is going quite well. They are on schedule. They have been fortunate to have good weather up until this point. They are planning to have the mechanical room foundation poured in November. So it's doable. We just have to see what the weather does. Up until today, so they have the lap pool, surge tank, concrete slabs and walls poured. They are working on forming and doing all the rebar and plumbing for the lazy river, and that should be poured later this week, and that removed next week, and then by the end of next week they should have the walls formed for those areas as well. So it's progressing nicely. We're still working on some details for some servicing going into the property, but other than that, no concerns. I think those are the biggest ones. Oh, rock dumping issue, that's right. So council did receive a letter regarding a concern about a small pile of rocks back in August. Sue had asked me to reference this in the quarterly report, essentially providing the reasoning why we don't accept material that way. As I've indicated, we used to accept material in the past. We're trying to get away from that practice. It's hard to verify what the quality of that material is, where it comes from, how much is it. We don't typically use that anywhere anymore because it's not good for any sort of base or even applying in alleyways as we've done in the past, because you don't know what kind of content is in there. So it can be problematic. So we've decided that we're not going to accept that. And unfortunately, residents are just going to have to deal with that.
All right, any questions on any of the reports, or you have one more report to finish, correct? Or did you?
That's Lisa's, and I've deferred it to October
right.
26th.
That's correct. Is there any questions on the 4 reports then? Seeing none, a motion to accept this information. Are you making that motion? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Motion to accept the 4 reports. And you had a question as well?
I did.
Go ahead.
Is the fort able to look at the province for some help with the barrack site in some of that manner as well with the COVID?
I know that was discussed at our last board meeting. I'm not sure COVID would give any money to operations for the old site, but they're looking at options on how to make the most of that.
Okay. No, there was just some discussion also too on the site and the maintenance. So.
Yes. Yep, that's been discussed for sure. All right, motions on the floor. Any further discussion? Called question, all in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. It's the first meeting of the month, so does anyone have something they'd like to share that's exciting with all of council from your boards or committees? Councillor Wolstenholme, yes.
Okay, thank you. So the headwater restoration, they tried to do a lot of that, but some has been deferred because of COVID. A very interesting presentation by Alvin First Rider of how they're trying to bring buffalo back to the reserve, and also they want grassland restoration to the original prairie grasses. And that was about it, really.
Any other reports?
Perhaps just a comment about the Empress Theatre Society. The theater, as everyone knows, is not showing movies, and for reasons that there are not any new movies to show, and as well, there are complications in using the theater for that purpose. And financially, it's just not feasible for them to offer movies at this time. But there has been an initiative of renting the theater out to families and individual groups. And that has actually been quite successful, and they've been able to generate some revenue that way. And so I mention it here that the theater is open for private bookings, and people who go there are really quite enjoying the facility, and they're able to generate some revenue that way. So more details, of course, are available at the Empress Theater office. But that's one of the initiatives that have been taken there. And as well, now that winter's coming, the popcorn sales are going to be up and running again. I'll mention that the CHTA, the Cultural Heritage Tourism Alliance, is working with the development of the app on this spot. And so that's underway. And then the last thing would be the Built Heritage Advisory Board. You mentioned it in your report that the second phase of the report on the historical buildings in the downtown historic area is almost complete. So,
Thank you very much. That's good. That's where we can have a Christmas party, eh, at the theater.
We
Any
may
other?
not have a Christmas party this year.
Aw. Any other, I know I can maybe share a couple of my own. The Foothills Alcohol Action Society, or otherwise known as the Foothills Center, is excited to have signed a contract to have their building start soon. So that is very exciting for them. So they're hoping to have construction begin in the next couple of weeks. So that's a pretty big endeavor for the society. So definitely, if you see any of the staff member there, they will. It's a big project, but it's necessary, and they're excited about it, and it's due. So that's exciting for them. For the fort, we just had our AGM last week. Not too much has changed. They gave some numbers. I did send the numbers in. They'll be on our next council meeting's report. So you'll see those there. They did get some extra funding they just released to assist with their collections for more documenting and cataloging a lot of their inventory. So that was today's announcement that they just got. So that's exciting for them. So considering all, it's been a hard year for them. But overall, I think with the amount of grant money that's come through, it's been still okay. Otherwise, the other committees are a little quiet. Mayors and Reeves still meeting virtually. Hopefully that can change soon as well. All right, anyone else? Sorry, Councillor Wilson.
Something I thought I should bring up probably, it's come out to the attention of Willow Creek Lodge, and I don't know if we've got it here yet or not. I haven't seen it from here, but the government, provincial government, is telling us not to hire a new CAO or anything like that because they would, I think they want to regionalize, which is, our lodge does not want to do that. It's running quite fine, and we don't want to do that.
Is that something we should be strongly advocating against with your board right now to make
Well,
sure
I think we're going to have to talk about that, Jim, don't you think? But I thought you should have a heads up on it, that they're sort of making an end run. So I don't know how else to talk about it, how to describe it, because they're not really saying they're going to do anything, but they're saying don't hire a new CAO before you talk to them about it. Well,
Was that supposed to?
what's that supposed to mean?
Well, they also insinuate that they can save a lot of money by regionalizing, which they certainly haven't done with health, so not sure how they're gonna do it here, but
And do you see them having the authority to force it? Yeah. Right, we own our own building, but we wouldn't get our operational funding. Okay. Something that we do need to keep very aware of. I know there's been rumblings of this probably for over a year, right? Longer than that. It's probably 2 years that this rumbling's been happening.
Yeah. Which department would that fall under?
Seniors?
Seniors? Seniors, okay.
Seniors, I think. All right. Any other comments? Councillor Dressler?
As the unit public affairs representative for 2384, I wanted to kind of give the community a heads up because there's been lots of questions from parents as to the cadet program. we're actually going to be starting, we've been in conversation with Lisa, and the first actual physical distancing parade night will be next Thursday. So we're really anxious to get in the boys and girls in with both Kainai and Fort Macleod back into working together, and hopefully making something of our training year. It's supposed to be a 50% all fun and 50% dry, but I think we're going to go with 100% fun and just make it more of an activity for the kids, because a lot of them are really eager to get back. And I think I'm hoping that some of our other youth programs are able to take back as well and get youth involved in them, including our minor hockey and curling, especially with winter sports. So I'm hoping that these organizations can actually draw from that. So, because it's a loss when our kids don't have that opportunity to get out and socialize. So.
Okay, very good. So if there's no other comments, there is no in camera, and our meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.